We are continuing on with solving by taking square roots. Today we're going to look at problems that involve more than two steps, so a multi-step equation. Something that you need to just remember, and we talk about it all the time, when you are solving an equation, whether it's a linear equation, a quadratic equation, the goal is to get the variable by itself. So you are solving for the variable, you are looking for an answer. In yesterday's warm-up, you had a problem that looked like 3x plus 5 equals 7. Okay, now when you're solving a basic equation, remember the first thing you need to deal with is your adding and subtracting. So always do your adding and subtracting first, and then you're going to deal with your multiplication and division. Okay. So in this case, I would start by subtracting 5 from both sides. So 3x equals 2. And then I would divide by 3. X equals 2/3. Okay, so just like when we're solving basic equations, we're going to do the same thing when we are solving by taking square roots. So let's look at 8x squared plus 6 equals 542. So if we're following rules of taking square roots, or if we're just following rules of solving basic equations, we're going to start by adding and subtracting first. So again, the goal is to get x by itself. So I'm going to start by subtracting 6 from both sides. 8x squared equals 536. Now this is similar to yesterday. We had a one-step equation before we did the square roots. So divide both sides by 8. X squared equals 67. Now back to our basic equation. We're going to take the square root of both sides. And I'm going to look and see if 67 breaks down at all, which it does not. So the square root of x squared is x. Don't forget you are solving by taking square roots, so you have your plus or minus. And since that doesn't simplify at all, it stays the square root of 67. Okay, let's look at one more together, and then I'm going to have you try a couple. So 16k squared plus 4 equals negative 21. 16k squared plus 4 equals negative 21. Okay, so same thing. Addition, subtraction first. So I'm going to start by subtracting 4 from both sides. So 16k squared equals negative 25. Divide by 16. So I have k squared equals negative 25 over 16. So there's a couple things here that we're going to have to deal with. We have a fraction. If you can reduce the fraction before you take the square root, it's it's helpful. If you don't want to and want to take the square root and then reduce, that's fine too. But we are going to take the square root of both sides. And if you remember from yesterday's lesson, anytime you are taking the square root with a fraction, you are going to take the square root of the numerator and then take the square root of the denominator. So the square root of k squared is k. Again, we have a plus and minus. We can't forget our plus minus. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 16 is 4. And hopefully you notice that there was a negative underneath the radical, which turns into an I. So your answer is plus or minus 5/4 I. You do want to check to make sure that this fraction doesn't reduce at all, which it doesn't, so you're good to go. Okay. I'm going to give you a few problems to try, and then we will go over those and we will be done. So go ahead and try 6x squared plus 6 equals 222. Eight x squared plus 4 equals 164. So I have 1/2 x squared plus 4 equals negative. Let's do negative 11. Okay, so you are going to take a few minutes to solve these on your own. If you're watching the video, pause the video because I'm going to go straight into solving them as instead. Okay. All right, so for number 3, I would start by subtracting 6 from both sides. So 6x squared equals 216. Divide both sides by 6. X squared equals 36. And when I take the square root of both sides, I get x equals plus or minus 6. Number 4, subtract 4 from both sides. So 8x squared equals 160. Divide both sides by 8. X squared equals 20. When I take the square root, I know I can break down 20. It's 4 and 5 and 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 2's and a leftover 5. So x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 5. Last problem, we are going to start by subtracting by 4. So 1/2 x squared equals negative 15. Remember, to get rid of our fraction, we are going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So these ones are going to cancel, leaving me with x squared. Negative 15 times 2 is negative 30. When I take the square root of both sides, the square root of x squared is x. We have our plus and minus because we're solving. 30 breaks down to 6 and 5, which breaks down to 2 and 3. There are no pairs, so everything's going to stay inside, but hopefully you noticed there was a negative on the inside, so there's our I. Square root of 30 is going to be our final answer.